Migraines, migraines, and more migraines. I've had a lot of them recently, which is not very fun. But on the plus side, I've also learned some stuff as well. So that's what I'll be attempting to share in this video today. Hi everyone, Paul Micallef here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. In the spirit of another video on migraines, I've decided not to use my lights today. So that's one little thing. I feel like in general, these migraines are teaching me a lot. It's like they are my teachers at the moment, and I just have to listen to the discipline that my teacher is giving me to hopefully learn a lesson in the process. So I recently had 3 migraines in the space of 2 weeks, which is quite a lot for me. That's almost my personal record. Not that setting these kind of records is good in any way, shape, or form. I think my personal record was 3 migraine days in a row last year. So I really hope that never happens again. But 3 in 2 weeks was still quite a lot, but then it's what happened after that that I find most interesting. Naturally, it's incredibly frustrating to be just physically incapacitated. Notwithstanding the pain and discomfort, just the additional stress of such a huge disruption is one of the most difficult aspects to deal with, for me personally at least. I work for myself and I choose to work 4 days a week, so that's 8 days every fortnight. And when 3 of those days are spent in bed having to cancel everything I plan to do on those days, that's not the kind of thing that can just be absorbed and everything's going to be fine. It's really quite unsettling, for lack of a better word. That is a massive understatement, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. And then naturally, if I start telling anyone, the first question people ask me is, do you know what causes them? Which again is a frustrating conversation topic because I've had these thoughts nonstop for 2 weeks while I haven't been able to do anything else. So I can't possibly bring the person up to speed on every theory I've come up with. But at the same time, they're trying to help, and you never know. Maybe getting a new idea might be the breakthrough that actually makes a difference. And in some ways, I kind of already have a sense of what brings them on. If you have migraines yourself, maybe you also have a bit of a sense of what brings them on, but it's also kind of vague and there's lots of different factors at play, which makes it difficult to predict. For example, I know it's got something to do with stress and something to do with mental fatigue and executive function fatigue and essentially pushing my brain too much until it complains and shuts down on me. There's a sensory element to that. There's a social element to that. There's a concentration element to that. But in terms of actually monitoring that limit and figuring out what the major factors are versus the things that just make it a little bit worse if it's already bad, sometimes I think the stress of just thinking about it and trying to figure it out is making it worse. But then, even when I do know the answer, sometimes that doesn't necessarily help either. So recently, for example, I've started organizing my next online summit. And if you haven't seen that event before that I've run in previous years, it's essentially a week-long online event where I interview 20-something different autistic speakers from all over the world and put it all together in one big free watch-on-demand event. Organizing it typically takes me 3 or 4 months with help. But it's not just the size of the event, it's also the types of tasks that I need to do to get it organized. I personally like to do one thing at a time. But especially in the early stages of organizing this event, the first step is to contact 25 different speakers and have the conversation about, this is the event. Would you like to be involved? What would you like to talk about? Let's figure out a topic. Let's negotiate all of the admin stuff like schedules and bios and profile pictures and all the other kind of behind the scenes stuff that we need just to get to the recording stage of the interview, which means I'm having over a dozen different asynchronous conversations all happening simultaneously. When I get to the actual recording part, that's the easy part. I personally really love the recording part. It's one of the things I love most about organizing this event is I actually get to talk to all of these experts from all over the world. We have fun, we have really interesting, engaging conversations, and I can be really present to that one thing. That's what my brain likes. It likes to be focused and present on one thing at a time. That's one of the reasons I got into life coaching, because I can focus on one person at a time, one conversation at a time, and really focus in on that and add value to that one situation, compared to having a dozen different partially completed conversations in the background that my brain has to keep track of. And this preference for a limited number of tasks at a time is a fairly common autistic trait. Sometimes it's called monotropism, which might be a video for another day. Give me a shout out if you'd like me to make a video on that topic. It also feeds into what I call responsibility hypervigilance, which I spoke about in a video not that long ago. It's a trait I've identified in myself, and I'm curious how common it is in other autistic people as well. It's essentially constantly scanning the environment to say, have I forgotten something? I really care about the quality of my work. And so my brain is constantly looking for ways to make it better, constantly making sure there's no tiny little thing that I've forgotten to do. Think of like triple checking for spelling mistakes or grammar inconsistencies in a piece of writing. Except with this type of work where I'm managing so many conversations in the background, it's not surprising that there is always more to do. If I were to actually think about it, the list of things I could possibly do is endless. Not only responding to emails I've just received, but what about contacting new people and reaching out and following up when I haven't heard from someone? All of these tiny little admin tasks just take a huge toll on my brain because it never allows itself to actually turn off. And speaking of turning off, running a global event means talking to people in lots of different time zones. If I try and finish my day at 5 p.m. and not check my emails anymore, that's exactly when everyone in Europe is waking up and just about to respond to my message. So if I want any chance of a few rounds of back and forth communication, I need to basically respond straight away. And then my brain's thinking, well, maybe I don't have to do that. Maybe I'll just respond tomorrow anyway. But then there's always the pressure. There's always more. As soon as I receive a piece of communication, there's the pressure, at least in the back of my mind, of I either need to respond to it right away, or make a note to myself to respond to it later, or think about it and schedule it. And all of these things add up in my brain continually until my brain says enough. In that sense, maybe it's not all that surprising that after a couple of really long days like that, my brain just gives up and forces me to have a day in bed. I don't know about you, but for me, a migraine feels like a complete mental reset. It's quite a painful reset, but as soon as it starts to subside, there's a huge sense of peace and relaxation. In fact, I don't want to go back to work. I want to stay in this rest state. I mean, I feel like I've earned it through the intense pain so that I can get to this fairly peaceful state. And the thought of going back to work, which triggered it in the first place, all that stress of trying to manage all that communication, why would I want to go back to that? Unfortunately, that's not a way out either, because the longer I spend resting, the more work piles up in the background. So in a sense, what I've been telling you so far is the background, a brief story of how it kind of almost makes sense that I did have 3 migraines in 2 weeks. But the interesting part is what I've changed as a result of that. This past week, I did something completely different. Instead of trying to hold on until the weekend, I got to Tuesday night, realized I was very, very, very close to my limit, and so made a few calls and cancelled all of my appointments for Wednesday afternoon, essentially giving me an extra 5 or 6 hours for my brain to just have a break in the middle of the week. Now, the really frustrating part about that is it's not always possible to just take a break every time my brain needs it. It's a bit like driving a car. Like if you're in the middle of the highway, you can't just stop. Like you have to make some plans to pull over and stop. And then if you've pulled over in the middle of nowhere, then that's not a great temporary solution either. But I was definitely very encouraged by the results of this week. I took an extra 5 hours off in the afternoon, made sure to do some of my really low brain power activities, which for me is just sitting in a bouldering gym, just watching the other people around me and occasionally trying something myself. It's the tiniest little bit social and it's interesting at the same time. But what it means is instead of work, migraine, it's deliberately take quite a lot of time off in advance. It was not easy psychologically to reschedule all those meetings. But ironically, the recent pain of the migraines gave me enough incentive to realize that it's actually serious enough for me to act upon. It's not just a nice idea, yeah, I should take breaks. It's more like stay awake while you're driving. It's a good idea. Bad things happen if you don't do this. So weirdly, as I said, I kind of feel like my migraines have been my teacher recently. I was really surprised how effective it was to take a break before I absolutely needed it. It weirdly actually allowed me to have a more productive week. It gets to the end of the week and I'm not completely crashing. I allowed myself a mini crash in the middle of the week, and now I don't need as much downtime over the weekend. I think I just assumed that I needed to have really big crashes all the time. I assumed I needed a 3-day weekend every weekend just to have enough time and energy to recover from Monday morning. Whereas actually, what if I don't push myself quite so hard in those 4 days? Maybe I can get by without a huge crash every week. Here I was thinking working 4 days in a row instead of 5 was a bit luxurious. And now I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't work more than 2 days in a row without having half a day off at least. And I know from personal experience that that is completely a personal thing. I know quite a few people who work 60 plus hours a week and others who work less than 10 or even not at all. So maybe my migraines are teaching me what my own limits are. It's definitely a bit frustrating when I have the energy and motivation and I want to do more and my body says no. But at the same time, I guess we all have limitations and it's just about figuring out what they are and respecting them and finding a way to work within that. Anyway, I think I'd better leave it there for today. Registrations are already open for the free online summit event in September, so make sure you get your tickets to that if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment if you can, and I will see you again next week.